few more minutes. We'll get started at 4:05. Thank y'all for joining. If you're calling in from a phone number, please text 337-263-9506 with your first and last name so we can identify you and know who you are and can put you in the correct breakout room. Or please change your name. Underneath participants, next to your name, it'll say more. Click on that, and then you'll see rename, and rename yourself to your first and last name, and designate yourself LCAG if you're LCAG, so we can put you in your correct breakout room. We'll give it just one more minute before we get started. We are recording this session, so it will be available after the meeting on the website, and we'll make sure we share the links with you guys. Each breakout will also be recorded, so you can go back and watch each of the breakout sessions if you wish. Everyone will be initially muted in this session. We'll go through a little bit of recap, and I'll let Gary do that in a minute. And then when we get into the breakout rooms, you will be unmuted to be able to have conversation with the bridge experts and the LCP team members. But initially you will be muted just so we can get through this beginning part and get to the next step, which is the breakout rooms. Okay, it's 4:05. We want to go ahead and get started. Tim, would you like to welcome everybody to the meeting?
Sure. I'd like to welcome everyone for being here today, putting in the time and effort to give us some input on your thoughts regarding the signature features and the bridges, the gateway elements and such. We have a lot of things to go through today. So glad to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Tim. All right, Gary, would you like to take it away?
Yes, ma'am. Hello there. It's Gary Magi, and I am the structure lead for and part of the LCP team for the I-49 connector. And so, so what I'm going to do here shortly is go over just a quick agenda of what we're going to share with you today, and talk about what we talked about last Tuesday, go through some of the feedback form questions that you have, as well as maybe introduce a few other questions with the goal of getting your input so we can record that as part of our CSS process. So, so what I'm going to start with is I'd like to share the agenda. And I know that you have a copy of it, but I just thought I'd kind of go over it for a minute. And we're going to spend the next 5 to 10 minutes just going over from a very high level the content that we talked about last Tuesday on the signature element bridges as well as the gateway elements. And then that's when Bree's going to break us out into 4 breakout groups. And each of these groups are going to be led by a bridge expert who can answer your questions and supported by an LCP member and an admin member. And during those breakout groups, let's talk about signature feature bridges. Let's get into the details about the options and the criteria and the costs, right? And let's talk about gateway elements. Jeff Grobe talked about that last week, and get your thoughts and comments about that. And if there's time, we want to talk a little bit about, we can bring up some of the discussion that we had from the previous workshop. And then of course, after the breakout, you'll be automatically brought back into the main group. We'll be able to have a debrief from each of the sessions that have occurred, and maybe have a little bit more background and content and dialogue about that topic. So that's basically what you're going to hear today from me. And And then I'd like to go and talk a little bit about the signature feature bridges and the presentation that we shared with you last week. And let's see, with that, okay, what you heard, right, is you heard about how we talked about a total of 5 signature feature bridge options. The first 3 of these options incorporated what we'll term faux elements or non-structural elements. And the reason why we chose these is because they're cost effective, right? And they mimic signature features that you see on other bridges across the country. All of these 3 options, the pylon, the cable, and the suspension bridge, all can incorporate the mainline viaduct structure types that we talked about in Design Workshop 1. And that's important, so you're aware of that. And of course, we talked a little bit more about really true signature bridges, and that was the arch structures, the single arch and the double arch. And there, the main difference being is that these structural elements actually are supporting the bridge and the loads upon it. But also they have an advantage of providing more open space underneath the structure. There's more of a span between the piers in this particular location. And that's, you know, and that's one key difference, right, among many. Bradley talked about the inspiration associated with the pylon bridges. And he went through the examples, and I'm going to fly through these because I know that you've seen them, and we'd be happy to go over them in more detail. And then he talked about the inspiration for the cable bridge, right? And you saw that, as well as sharing his ideas and thoughts about the suspension structure. And then Eric shared a little bit more about the single arch and the advantages that it brings, and what really drove him to develop this design. And likewise, we talked about the double arch. And then when we got to the point of introducing the structures, we talked about how we evaluated them. Okay, and we evaluated them by cost, maintenance of traffic, inspection, and aesthetics. And of course, aesthetics, particularly about signature feature bridges, is a huge criteria. But so is cost, right? And we think about construction costs. We need to share that funding has not been identified for the construction of the corridor viaduct, but this funding will likely come from a combination of local, state, and federal funds. You heard us talk about premium costs, right? So what are premium costs? And premium costs really are the costs, the additional costs to construct that signature feature bridge if it were to be built along the mainline viaduct. That's huge because the state is on board to support the construction of a mainline viaduct with 150-foot spans and 22-foot vertical clearances as part of the route requirements. If there were to be a signature feature bridge within that mainline viaduct, that premium cost would be what the additional cost would to construct that structure. So in a way, it's kind of like it is a savings because you're not paying for everything. There's already some costs already built into this project. And that premium cost likely, is going to have to come from local or other sources, at least at this point. And I know the state and Tim would like to talk to you more about that if you were to have questions about that topic. So, anyway, we're getting close to the end of our little recap, and I'm going to go through quickly what Jeff had shared with you about the gateway elements and how there are different types of gateway elements and where gateway elements can be located. Just like the signature bridges, we identified locations. We also identified possible locations of the gateway elements. And as you saw, gateway elements can be arches, it could be columns, it could be monuments, it could be really whatever we feel fit into the corridor. And that's what we shared with regards to the function and the type of as well as examples and options along that. And then lastly, we shared a little bit about the signature feature bridges at locations. And that's basically the locations I had identified. And this particular slide is one of your feedback forms that we had provided when we provided that homework for the LCAG. And, you know, we have identified locations near the St. Genevieve Church and along the Gateway near 3rd and 6th Street, as well as the core area and then Vermilion River crossing. So anyway, that was basically a very high level, and there's a lot more to discuss that we'd like to share with you, depending on the kind of questions you have. But Bree, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it back over to you so we can get ready to break out into the breakout rooms and you can provide a little input on that.
Absolutely. I think we're probably just about ready. I just want to reiterate to please go ahead and change your name and make sure you identify if you're LCAG. I think we've gotten everybody into a breakout room. Like Gary said, there's 4 breakout rooms. It'll be about 40 minutes that we'll have discussion. LCAG members, you'll be unmuted in the breakout room so we can have that, you know, back and forth discussion, and your bridge experts will lead you through it. At about 10 minutes before we jump back into the main session, you'll get a little warning, and then it'll start to count down a minute before we get all pushed back into the main session where we do a recap. So with that being said, I think that we're ready to go. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Make sure we get everybody back in the main room. We appreciate all the input that was given. I think we're all back. Okay. Let's start with Jeff Grobe. You want to give feedback from
yes.
room number 1?
Sure. Sure. Well, I think the biggest comment or the biggest point that was made that I really think is an important one is that one of our participants made this following comment. I think this is a big deal. There are 5 signature structure potentials. The first 3 being faux structures really just take the viaduct with its 150-foot spans and 22-foot height and put something else on it. It has pylons or, you know, arches or suspension cables or something. But it's really just the same viaduct, only with some more stuff. And it doesn't change what happens on the ground plane. The last 2, the double arch and the cable one, all of a sudden you now see a much different understructure space, and that can be seen as potential a mitigating factor and for maybe some other impacts that may be identified somewhere on down the line as part of the EIS. The ability to create community space underneath as mitigation can only be done with bridge types 4 and 5, not 1, 2, and 3. And we talked about that in some length, and that's a very important point, where the other ones might have, obviously they all have placemaking potential and identification and iconic purposes, but the first 3, you get some additional potential visual impact by virtue of their size or what they're doing with a pylon or a suspension thing, but you don't get any of the value back underneath that 4 and 5 do. And that's really, that's has potential for using that capability somewhere in later on down in the SEIS evaluation. So I think from my takeaway from that one, there's other stuff too, which is, you know, important, but that one, that was discussed at length. And I think that if I was going to tell the entire group anything, it would be that.
Thanks, Jeff. I'd also like to add in how some of the folks on our breakout session talked about and expressed a preference to a more traditional signature bridge, and what the suspension bridge has to offer, and how it's stood the test of time, right? And for all these structures that are very much similar across it. But conversely, was very interested in a single arch, and how it really had, you know, an impact, or could have an impact. I guess, Jeff, do you want to share a little bit about the gateway versus signature element?
Yeah, there's a few votes for having a standalone gateway. There was some sentiment for, doesn't have to be associated with a bridge or viaduct per se. It could be anywhere in the locations where, as we had thought, where once you get south of 10 and around the airport somewhere, those were probably some logical gateway locations, and they could be not associated with any parts of the structure, but could be freestanding elements that say, you know, this is now Lafayette, you know, welcome. I think that's probably, but again, somebody else mentioned the idea of having a gateway element in a park or something that was useful, again, to the community. If you have a gateway element that you just look at it and you don't do anything with it, is not as valuable as a gateway element in a space that's usable for people. And I can't argue with that. As a landscape architect, I see a big degree of value in that as well. So any way to combine those things certainly has my attention.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Gary Magi, this is Mike McGaugh. And maybe you can be looking this up while we're discussing this. The issue came up of whether that table that had the premium cost included the total life cycle, including maintenance. And we weren't 100% sure what the answer was. So if you could look that up, and that's an issue when they come to me for my feedback.
You're on mute, Gary.
Okay, I will do that, Mike, and talk when your group gets a chance.
Let's go to Joe Keynes. Gary Heitman, your group. Joe, you're on mute as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Bree. So our breakout group, we spent a lot of time talking about some of the best locations to incorporate gateway elements. We had a lot of feedback about, you know, not just having one single location, but creating opportunities to celebrate, you know, entry into various areas along the corridor. Just a short list, I-10 as you come in from the north and possibly south sides, near the airport area as another, Johnston Street, and maybe even the core area as the other locations where they could be celebrated. We talked about the scale of the features as you enter these various areas, and you can't just put some little small thing on the side of the bridge and expect it to make an impact. You really need to consider the size of the bridge itself and how it can, how or what size the feature needs to be in order to accentuate the area. We did also talk about, you know, kind of the modern architecture styles versus the traditional and contemporary and whatnot. Style was acknowledged as important, but it also needs to be practical. You know, we can't wish for the Cadillac and all we can afford is the Honda. The design elements need to be set up such that, you know, you don't throw all your eggs into one basket. It's kind of a combination of things. And, you know, if the situation arises where we can't, or where a certain element is out of the budget, then when you pull that out, you don't have anything left in just, you know, a standard bridge. Hopefully there's something left because it's layered on that you can still provide some type of theme on the bridge structure itself. So, you know, a lot of focus was put on the length of the bridge and how it takes up a majority of the corridor alignment. And Things like lighting and possibly Art Deco could help accentuate the bridge features. And again, gateways into different areas, not just one area, should be considered. Bradley, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think you captured it really well. I think that, one of the key things that we touched on was this notion of style, and certainly the importance of not letting we had a long conversation about form follows function and not wanting to just strip something down to its bare functional essence, but instead make sure that we're really capturing the purpose for the thing, which extends beyond simply satisfying the structural need. And, we had a great conversation about this idea of creating a corridor-wide narrative, that incorporates a number of different elements. So you've got these doorways that bring you into and out of the corridor. And then you have these moments along the length of the corridor where we're demarcating, special events like the airport, like MLK. And then we have, also a major event like the single arch bridge at Johnston Street, so that you're really setting up this experience that extends across the entire length of the thing and can vary in terms of scale, in terms of kind of architectural volume. And then, and again, it allows us to create this very complex layered sort of experience, and we can adjust that based on available funding. So in pulling one of those elements out of that narrative, we're not destroying the entire thing. So I think that was an incredibly, worthwhile conversation.
That's important.
And this is Gary. I would just add to that a little bit. I would say we had folks were leaning towards a preference on the single arch, similar to group one, I would say, but also just liked the more structural options because of just the honesty that it brings to the bridge itself. Less preference to the ones that just added things on it for the look.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Mike McGaw.
Yes, that was the fastest 40 minutes I've ever lived through. There was a lot of concern in our group about costs, about maintenance costs, about initial construction costs, who would pay for what. That's how that table came up, Gary Imagine. And I don't know, did you look that up? Did that table represent life cycle as well as initial construction costs?
Yes, sir. We have a breakout of the 5 options and the costs and how they were developed. And each of those 5 options had incorporated life cycle costs that are representative of the structure. And how we determine this premium, so to speak, is that we used the segmental structure type as a kind of like a baseline structure type, because that particular superstructure is used predominantly in all 5 options for this evaluation. And so based upon that, we computed a total cost for that bridge, and this signature element bridge for all options were roughly about 800 feet long, plus or minus, about 4 to 5 spans, totaling 800 feet. Once we figured out the cost of that 800-foot span, we subtracted out the cost associated with constructing a conventional structure. The types that we use the SG, which is, or the SP, the segmental box type. And once we subtracted that cost out, we came up with a premium. Okay, that's probably the best way to evaluate it, because we know that we're going to build a viaduct. That's a given. Okay, and so if we're able to, use some of that money for that portion to construct a signature feature bridge, it's just going to be that much less.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Well, to get right down to it, with that concern for cost factored in there, the verdict was pretty much that the single arch bridge would be the most attractive option if the DOTD was paying for it. If it was on up to the city to have to pay the premium cost, they liked the idea of the PYLON bridge. But of the two true structural options, the single arch was the more preferred option. There was some concern about the cables obscuring the view off the side of the bridge for some of those options. They thought maybe even if we could do an animation from the driver's perspective. They wanted to make sure people are aware there's a downtown out there and maybe attract them to it. So they don't want that to be obscured by the cables. They do like the idea of the single arch being more amenable to underbridge uses. That was noted. Let's see what else. Now, as far as the gateways, we talked about the columns, and there was not a lot of support for the columns unless you were flying over and could see sort of looking down. It might mean something, but just a forest of columns there didn't seem to be attractive. The arch, which is inspired by the crawfish, was noted pays homage to the Homa tribe, and that was a positive thing. But overall, they want something that says, "Welcome to Lafayette." And they like the idea of something sort of spanning over the structure. So maybe something that combines a sculptural, something that pays homage to the accordion or to the palm tree or something that spans over the bridge that says clearly, "Welcome to Lafayette" would be something we should maybe strive for. Ian, anything else major that I overlooked?
Okay, I guess not. All right, John McNamara, you're up. You're on mute, John. There you go.
Still can't hear you.
There you go.
Hello.
Yep.
Okay. We had kind of a quiet group. The idea of a timeless look to the architecture and to the structure was pretty important. And that went for either whether we went with a signature feature type bridge or a signature bridge itself. The two preferred types, if we were to go with the signature feature, were suspension bridge, because it's proved to be timeless across the country and around the world. All you've got to do is look at a lot of those automobile advertisements that we see crossing the Bixby bridges out there on the coast of California, and those are signature arch bridges, and they were built in the 20s and 30s. And then if we were to be able to be fortunate enough to have the resources, the single arch was clearly preferred. Again, simple, again, kind of a timeless look, also evokes a gateway kind of feature to the core area, and of course could be gateway to Lafayette for that matter. There was some discussion in our group that if the city is going to participate in financing, we really ought to be financing a signature bridge. It ought to be a real bridge, not add-on elements to a viaduct. But of course, that also meant that the cost would be probably in the range of 3 to 4 times what it would be for any of the signature features. So there, again, that was really all kind of oriented to, most of the discussion was really strongly oriented to the idea of an architectural theme timeless look, whether it's a signature feature type bridge or a signature arch bridge. We just had time to barely touch on the gateway elements, so we didn't have really a whole lot of conversation about the gateways, other than the fact that if we did go with the single arch bridge in the central location, it could be both a gateway as well as a signature bridge. And of course, we touched on, as everybody else sounds like they did as well, another advantage to going with a signature bridge, even though it's more costly. I think there was the insinuation there that we also bought ourselves really column-free space, massive column-free space for a potential central event space. So even though a single arch bridge is pretty costly, it does give you a signature bridge. It gives you a gateway, and it could give you a column-free central space. So that's pretty much group number 4. Joe, anything else to add to that? Jose?
I think you covered them, John.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Gary, I'll kick it back to you.
Okay. Okay. Well, and help me out here. I think that we've heard from everybody, and maybe there's other input that we still need to collect, and I do hope we get that through the forums, through an email comment on the website, or whatever works best.
Gary, can I add one thing about the forums real quick that came up in our group? And that is that as you know, the feedback forms were limited in terms of the subject matter that they touched on. And we had a great conversation about, for example, this idea of this kind of corridor-wide narrative. And so use the comment area within the feedback forms to give us any feedback that you may have. So it's not just limited to the particular, elements on that form. If you have something that you want to provide us with in writing, please do so, because it helps us. It also, contributes to the permanent record for the process.
Awesome. So Bree, I guess I know we had an agenda item on conclusions and preferences, but really, we've heard from the 4 groups, and we've heard really a lot of different opinions. I heard a lot of preference for the single arch, and then the suspension. Obviously, were 2 of the more talked about items. I do like the timeless discussion. I thought that was a very key important thing. All these structures are concrete structures. They're all durable. Concrete structures inherently are less noisy. They have a lot of benefits other than just what else they bring. And, when you look at the feedback forms and you see the questions that the team came up with, just ask yourself, do those things make sense for these options? I think Jeff has some great questions on the gateway elements. And I think we heard a conclusion that gateway elements, can and maybe should be separate from the structure and from the bridge. And so I guess we'll compile all that information when we put these responses together and put it into the report. So I guess that's my that's my agenda item 545. And I might kick it back to Bree. I guess we have the next item to introduce. And before we go there, maybe, and I'll let John or Jeff get queued up for this, but I'd like to have one of our LCP team provide a little intro, or at least an introduction on what's going to happen in workshop 3. Because that's something else we're going to talk about. But I guess I'm going to open it up to our leaders, Steve Wallace, Tim, and Jenny, Noel, Deidre. Any other conclusions that we want, at least, or statements that's fair to share?
Yeah, we like getting all the feedback we can and everybody's opinions and thoughts on the various features, and gateway and stuff. You can also still email them to us as we go along through the CSS and EIS process. We'll take that input as we move on into partner agency or executive committee meetings. We'll bring up, comments and input and such that we've had, and where that falls, and that way they'll have that information with them for the decisions made going forward and such. But we're going to continue to take input as we go through the process on any of these items and any of these workshops. So feel free that you can still email or give comments in some of those forums along the way. It's not just during this meeting, in case you get additional information from your constituents and such. But that's just what I had to add.
Yeah, continue outreach. We'll do as much as we can. And John and Jeff, would you like to provide a little preview, or at least introduce what you guys will be talking about at our next meeting or workshop?
Hey Gary,
Sure.
real quick, this is Deidre.
Oh,
Well, Deidre.
Hey, just real quick, somewhat related to what we're talking about today, but for any of our neighborhood representatives who are on the call tonight, I know there's a lot of things going on, but we are in the process of planning our neighborhood outreach meetings, and I have sent emails out to the various neighborhood groups. If we have not had a chance to either phone conference with you or video conference with you, please just reach out to us, or I'll be just following right back up again with everyone, because we do want to take the time to chat with you. It's not going to take long, but we want to take the time, excuse me, we want to take the time to chat with everyone to make sure that we are planning accordingly for each of the neighborhood groups. So,
Gary.
thank you. Yes, Mike.
Yeah, this, one thing we discussed that we would spend just a little moment on is the height of the bridges. And the fact that the normal height for clearance over other roadways that would be used by DOT is 16.5 feet roughly. And that we've committed to, or DOTD is committed to building this at 22 feet, which gives, it opens it up. It's more aesthetically pleasing. And then we've talked about the 30 feet, which would be really an enhancement. And we just want to kind of make that, clear to everyone that the 22 feet is a real upgrade from the normal height that DOTD does construct their bridges. And from what I remember, the 30 feet, there was concern over the visual impacts of raising it up that high. But I think all of our renderings that we looked at were shown at 22. Isn't that correct?
They are. And I also want to direct you that Bradley had put in this VR room, and we do have all the graphics and images from Design Workshop 1. So, so we can point a person to the particular location that shows basically what it looks like if you're standing near the structure that's 22 feet clear, or if you're standing near the structure that's 30 foot clear. Yeah, and you visually can see that difference, right? And judge for yourself if you think it provides value. So, but for Design Workshop 2, everything's at 22 feet.
John, Jeff, do y'all want to take us into next steps and overview?
Sure. The next workshop is targeted for the first couple weeks in October, early October. And it will really have three kind of key feature areas that we're going to begin talking about. The first will be a review of the alternatives that we have moving into the EIS. We're, as you know, we're we're doing a supplemental EIS to supplement the earlier EIS document and to reflect all the concept refinement work we did to adjust the alignment to make it a lot more compatible with the neighborhoods in downtown, and to look at kind of how to enhance adjacent economic and community development along the corridor as well. So the first part will be looking at the SES alternatives, and we'll walk from one end of the corridor to the other in terms of looking at what would be built on the ground, what would be built in the air, where the transitions would occur, where the access points will be, and so forth. And again, that'll all be based on the concept refinement framework that we put together from 2016 to 2018 with the former Technical Advisory Committee and Community Working Group. Then in addition to those alternatives, we're going to start talking about bicycle and pedestrian aspects of the corridor as well. As you've all heard and said over the years, we need to reconnect the neighborhoods with downtown and with each other. And we need to do that for all modes of transportation, vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian. And we start with looking at the regional and local network and talking with the city and with Acadiana Planning Commission and Bike Louisiana. And we're going to talk a little bit about that background and conversations that we've had and continue to have with those groups and what their policies are and what they envisioned potentially coming as a part of the I-49 project in the Evangeline corridor area, Evangeline Thruway corridor area. So with that in mind, then we will move to the third part of that agenda, which is to focus on the Evangeline Thruway itself. As many of you remember, the earlier concept from the earlier EIS had a couple of large single point urban interchanges in the downtown area, which were very, very land intensive, not very pedestrian or bicycle friendly, and really not allowing that reconnectivity to occur that we've heard about significantly. So that's why that concept refinement took place. And we moved to a whole different approach to accessing the I-49 corridor in the downtown area by using the frontage roads along the corridor, looping them off, connecting them into the Evangeline Thruway, either in a boulevard fashion or in a couplet fashion, and using that moving through the central area and then reconnecting down at the south end of downtown to the frontage roads. And as a result, we have a continuous access to I-49, either to the north or to the south, using the Evangeline Thruway, and we've gotten rid of those two large interchanges. But the design of that Evangeline Thruway, whether it's a couplet or a boulevard, has yet to be resolved. And of course, as we've done with everything on the project in terms of the viaducts and the design elements in workshop number 1 and the signature features and bridges and gateways in number 2, we're bringing forth a series of alternatives. So we'll be looking at 3 different levels of improvement, whether it be a couplet option or a boulevard option, in terms of pedestrian, bicycle, vehicular, and even parking. And so we'll be introducing those, talking about the costs of those and the implementation of those and who to be responsible for what. So those are the 3 big elements of workshop number 3, but we want to do one last thing too, and we want to introduce and continue the discussion on the menu of design enhancement elements along the way. And those design enhancement elements really kind of fall into 3 purpose categories. There's mitigation measures in terms of mitigating any environmental impacts that are identified along the corridor and what we can do to mitigate. There's design enhancements themselves, whether it's improve to the walls, to the bridge structures, to including a signature bridge, to doing gateways. And then there's joint use opportunities. Joint use being projects that might be done on the ground, adjacent or under the corridor, and which of those, what of those kinds of things could be accomplished, what have been done elsewhere, and what do we have for analog ideas from elsewhere, and again, who could be the implementers of those, the funders of those, as well as the long-term maintenance and operations of those things. So we're just going to introduce that whole subject, because that'll then get carried into workshops 4, 5, and 6. So that's a pretty thorough review of number 3 and a glimpse of what 4, 5, and 6 will be over the following months.
Awesome. Thank you. Steve Wallace.
Hey, Gary.
Lead us home.
Okay. Well, I want to echo what Tim said. Thank you guys for spending your time this evening to give us the input. And we know we're kind of dumping a lot of information on you. And so as you think of more input, more preferences and things that you'd like for us to know, please let us know. And we've kind of segmented the design workshops to focus on different areas, but we realize that it takes time to process through that. So as you come up with more input, please pass that along to us. Or if, as you talk to your groups, if they have more input, more things that they'd like to make sure that we hear, please pass that along as well. We'll always give time for that at the beginning of every workshop to capture any other feedback you may have gotten from previous workshops. So please do that. But again, thanks for giving us your input. That's exactly what we need. And so as John said, we have a lot more coming up, workshops 3 through 6. So Bree, I believe we'll be kind of sending out more information about the next workshop in the next coming days, and the dates, times, and agenda and so forth. So I'll turn it back over to you, but thank y'all for participating. Appreciate that.
Yes, thanks, Steve. You will be
Bree?
getting it. Yes.
Can I use a minute or two?
You may.
I would like to second what Deidre said. We're hard at work planning a multi-pronged approach to reach out to all of the neighborhoods along the corridor in whatever way, shape, or fashion is most comfortable for those neighborhoods. If it's participating in a neighborhood event, either live or virtually, we're willing to do it. If it's setting up a mini community meeting at a place like Rosa Parks or something like that, we'll be there. We'll have some of the graphics that you've seen from workshops 1 and 2. We'll do that. And we're exploring the options of using public television to do either a special show or maybe a pre-recorded tape of some of the presentations to get broad information out there. But we really want to get down to the neighborhood by neighborhood level along the corridor. We will have public meetings as well, large scale public meetings, but then part of really moving into the next step, which as you could tell is more of the on the ground stuff, is working with the neighborhoods and on those various ideas. So if you're a representative of one of the neighborhood groups and you haven't talked with Bree yet, please do. And we'll work with you to plan something that works for you. Thanks, Bree.
Great. Thank you, John. An email will be going out with recordings from all of the breakouts, like I said, and the main sessions. So I encourage you to go back and watch each of the breakout recordings so you can hear what was talked about. I also encourage you to reach out to anyone that you know on the LCAG that hasn't been attending. We're trying to encourage more participation. And we will be making calls and doing follow-up to make sure that we can continue to have a robust conversation and get input. But you will receive an email tomorrow. It will have all the information that you need. You can reach out to us if you didn't get something that you need. And again, feedback forms can be sent to communications@LafayetteConnector.com, and we'll pass them along to the rest of the team so they can have your input. So with that being said, I think we are done. I hope y'all have a great night. Thank y'all for joining.
Thanks, Bree.
Thank you very much,
Bye-bye.
Bree. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bree.